more growth and limits to growth. Now, what the whole situation here is growth. These are things that create growth and things that can limit growth. Now, as you do it well, you tend to have growth, success, expansion. You do it poorly, you'll tend to have shrinking and stuff like that. And so these are other things that affect growth. We have broken up in a few different parts, so let's pardon my accent. So let's look at some of them. And this one is political stability or instability. This is what's a how can your system take blows? Can your political system? Because if your political system shatters, remember governments don't usually pay for everything they do wrong. The population pays. Government's the last that pays. So the question comes is, do you have political stability? Can you change power? Or as I'll say in the next slide, do losers live? Now, I use this one here. This two cartoons. Now, these are both would be, Democratic cartoons, which the Democrats of that time, not really related to the Democrats of this time, but of the period. And they said, okay, like, it's the nice, stately, and, John Adams, it says, our littlest president. They only had two presidents before him, but he was actually, comparatively speaking, in a country that was about 5'7", he was like 5'5" or something, 5'4", something like that. And Thomas Jefferson was 6+ feet tall, so was George Washington. So it's like now, but the 1800 U.S. election was full of. I mean, they did a lot of nasty words, not innuendos. They both said the world was going to end if the other guy won. The two political parties were there. Heck, in 1801, you actually had a fight, and actually in the 1790s, a few fights on the floor of Congress. Literally speaking, fist fights. But the interesting thing is, our election, we made the way it was designed was a mistake. Not the whole thing. In other words, you could actually end up with a tie in which the presidential candidate of the same party and the vice presidential candidate of the same party had the same number of electors, and they because never didn't say president, vice president. You would pick each one have two votes, and so they'd the first highest vote getter of electoral votes would be president, the second highest would be vice president. So each delegate would have two votes, and so you'd vote for theoretically a president, vice president. Ended up in his high. It's all messed up. They did a constitutional amendment to change that, and we never had a problem with that again. The interesting thing is, the system worked. Everybody was content. In other words, no one was killed, no one was shot. Jefferson Adams actually became very good friends. Again, they were friends before then. They actually became friends. Friends after then. They wrote letters to each other. They corresponded. They debated policies, and they actually learned a lot of things in terms of, and that's political stability. So let's look at it. So I look at this and say, now I use the term how does system decide winners and losers? And again, I go back and I use the term equality under the law. Every individual is treated the same way. Everybody knows how it functions. Doesn't matter, it's this the way the system works. That's equality under the law. And this is very important. You want everybody to trade the same way, because if you treat the other side, and I don't mean just calling them, I mean like indict them. This is one, do losers live? The Trump impeachment was bad precedent. Why was Trump impeached? He was a bad man. We made up charges against him. He engaged in shenanigans. He didn't engage in any shenanigans. In fact, when I went and tried to, charge him for, documents were not, stored right. Well, actually, the documents were declassified by president. He had that right to declassify, and he did. And they were actually stored in a vault in his house. But they raided his house. Vice President, when Biden was vice president, and when he was senator, he stored documents in his garage. Garage you can walk up to and pull the door up. That act was actually illegal, and he couldn't declassify them. I'm pointing out a sense of, so do losers live? In other words, that's why I didn't like the Trump impeachment, because if they impeached him after he left president, they impeached him again because they just wanted to get rid of him. Oh, he's so bad, we impeached him twice, stuff like that. Do losers live? And this is very important. In 2021, the majority party actually banned a congresswoman from Georgia, from sitting on committees. It's the minority party that picks who their people are sitting in the committee, not the majority. But they picked that. When they had the hearings on President Trump, the majority party said, well, we don't like who the minority party's picking to be on these hearings, so we'll pick your people. Which you don't do. The other guy gets to pick the people. And so the rules, that's an engagement of losers living. Are the rules known? Because the rules can be known. They can now. When I use the term rules, everybody knows what the rules are. You get the rules known, and everybody knows they're unfair. Everybody knows someone's committing fraud or doing it, and they're gonna win, stuff like that. And so the rules known. Everybody knows how the game's played. Because a lot of times, at least the rules are known. You know you're gonna be cheated and lose, but you know how to stay out of trouble. And I advocate and point out, are they fair? Now, and I use the term fair because a lot of people say, oh, everybody has different ideas of fairness. What I mean by fair is it treats everybody by the same measure, whether it's a friend or an enemy. In other words, if I'm saying someone should be caught for speeding and ticketed, it's the same standard whether I like them or don't like them. I may get personal schadenfreude by somebody I don't like, but it is still the same standard. Kind of like, I'll use a simple analogy. You watch a football, baseball game, and it's like, no, that wasn't a penalty. That was a strike. You don't like admitting it, but it's the same standard. This is the same for the political. We want the political system to measure everyone by the same standard. So, when I use the term, I mean that from a Christian biblical perspective, equality under the law. There is no difference. Not the thing I made before. We talked about when people. Yeah, I'm using this because no one did it about Kenji Brown, or the I don't remember the other two. Just Kenji Brown's one. But no one lied about her. People lied about Kavanaugh. They submitted false affidavits, and when it was being investigated, they found out they could go to jail. They said, "Well, that didn't really happen. I just wanted to save abortion." Now these are actions, but does my political system measure things? So I know it is. A lot of people don't like the electoral system in the United States because we do the electoral college, but everybody knows what it is. Everybody votes the same way. There's no special rules for voting and stuff like that. Okay, people say, well, you have to be a citizen to vote. That's right. Any citizen can vote. And I mean by the same standard. Can they be corrected? In other words, my system's imperfect. Can I correct changes? Can I alter things? Here's one that people have said recently for the last several years. I'm saying again, anybody who supports Donald Trump, they should be fired. Whoa. You could be very careful with that one. Because equality to law, right? Anything you do to me, we're applying the same standard. You gain the power, you could fire me. I now come to power and say what? I can fire you. And that's what I said, would you say so? And that's why, like, for example, way back, you go back 200 years, it was called the spoil system. When someone got elected, they could appoint everybody in the public offices who were their political supporters. It's called the spoil systems. So the winner goes to spoils. We knew, that's not fair. Yes, we knew what the system was. But now they're saying if they get fired, they should be like, you get people like, ABC's being, what is it, the new CEO Disney's going, ABC's being persecuted because of politics, because Trump's coming after us. It's like, Trump's not coming after you. That's a lie. It's like the guy, I don't know if the guy's smoking weed or something like that. I have no idea. But that's a lie. He's not coming after you. If he was, there's all sorts of ways he could come after. The idea of we live in a fascist state because Trump's. No, it's not a fascist state. This is a fascist state. ABC would be towing the line because why? After Trump got elected, someone walks in, blows off Iger's hand. Iger appoints a Trump person to fill in his new position. The people on all the View are fired, and they all, hung themselves or something like that. And lots of that's what a fascist state does. That's what a communist state does. They kill their opposition. Totally bad. We'll get that one in a second, actually. And so they did Trump's supposed to be no. Does anyone believe? People should be fired for incompetence. In other words, when I pick on Disney and stuff like that, mostly it's because of the fact of you ruin a lot of things I like as a child, which is a horrible thing to do. But that's what you've failed the fans. You've made something lousy. And I'm just a regular human being. I complain about it. Sure. It should be fired for failing. For failing what? Fill your role as fulfilling the needs of the customers. That's it. I should have the government doing that, but if I had the government doing something, it would be applied equally, the same standard. And that's so does the political system do that. And so when I use the idea of fair, I mean the same standard, the same measure. Okay, ranking these systems. The first rank, the best system, was called a constitutional republic or a constitutional system. The power of the state is defined and limited. There's certain things the state cannot touch. When I use the term state, the state means the government. Now, constitutional republics can range from being a pure market economy to even a socialist country. France is a socialist country. They have a defined, delineated constitution that says these powers go to the government, these ones go to the people. We are setting, these laws don't change because whoever else is in. And yes, they did play with that once, which is very bad precedent. In fact, so the power of the state is defined and limited. Some things the state cannot touch. This prevents the government from being all powerful and crushing people. An example of this constitutional republic was when we had the 2000 election. It was recounts, and there was a number of reporters on C-SPAN. I always like this one because it was great. It was one of those ones we used to have the 5-minute clip because it's kind of funny, and it's a sardonic way of funny. And talk about you get these international reports talk about the American recount and election stuff like that, and the British reporter goes, well, these Americans, they're not used to doing these things. They're still new at it. They've been doing it for a few hundred years. They'll get it eventually. The French reporter goes, the Americans are kind of rather stupid. They don't know how to organize and run anything. Which, considering we're still on our first republic and they're on their fifth republic, makes you question whether or not the French actually have everything there. You know what I'm saying? I'm being cruel. I'm being American. I admit that. But they are in their fifth republic. And in between, they had a few kingdoms and a few empires. That's a minor problem. Just pointing out. Okay. But, seriously, the German reporter gives and says, given the history of my country, who am I to comment on the Americans? But it was the Nigerian reporter who was actually, he goes, this is great. And the other three look at him like, are you insane? He goes, no. He goes, in my country, there would be civil war. In the United States, they all sit down. What's the rules? How do you do it? How do you measure things? How do you do that? How do you do that? He goes, they're trying to play by rules. No one's killing each other. So a constitutional republic limits the power of the state. Even I said you could be a socialist country and still have a constitutional republic. I view it as more difficult. But for example, in France, the French government is truly restricted on impinging free speech. It's very difficult. Like in England, Canada, Australia, they all have speech codes, speech laws. You can't say certain things we don't like, stuff like that. You can't have certain opinions the government doesn't like, all that kind of screwed up stuff. In France, United States, you're still free to write and publish and say things people may not like because it's called free speech. Because when people put restrictions on it, they don't apply them equally. They never apply them equally. And so they define it. Now, obviously, from my perspective, I prefer a free market or market economy system and a constitution that is paired that I view as easier because you restrain the power of the state. And it's easier to have a restrained state in that system. You still could have an amazing economy or even a socialist economy. It defines functions. In other words, it doesn't mean things can't be changed, but changing the U.S. Constitution takes a lot of work. Even changing the French Constitution takes a lot of work. Good dictators. Good dictators are stunningly rare. This is like, oh, we got a good dictator. It's like, please. This is up there with hen's teeth. Now, a good dictator does not mean a dictator is kind, warm, and fuzzy and a lovely human being and love me so badly. No, it doesn't mean that at all. A good dictator just means the person's objective. They take over the government, they're running it, they're a dictator, and they want to make their population better off. They want to improve their people. Every dictator says they want to improve their people. A good dictator actually does improve their people. A good dictator will, go back to the roles of government, right, will create and define the roles of God and other things sticking. It's because my not sure why mouse pad's sticking. It'll limit the power of the state. It'll seek to have the economy grow. There'll be a lot of things that outside. They'll let things be outside. They'll let private property exist. Dictators don't like private property. It's outside their control. They'll let free speech exist. Again, why are they doing that? Because it's function. They'll create equality under the law. Now, the reason I have Pinochet here is the fact of when Pinochet overthrew the Chilean government, he was, roughly speaking, he was told by the Chilean Congress to arrest the president. No, it was President Allende. The Chilean Congress told the Chilean military to arrest the president. The president of Chile told him to go and arrest the Congress. In other words, the system was destabilizing. He arrested everybody. And again, in the course of his leadership, about 5,000 people disappeared. Now, keep in mind, Cuba, which is universally loved, about in similar population at the time, about 1 to 2% of the population died. So that's like a few 100,000 versus 5,000. But people don't like Pinochet, so he gets tagged. But he did. He established property rights. He established rule of law. He established how the Constitution, in fact, the Constitution he wrote, going back to number one, the Chileans were given a vote by the socialist government to eliminate, I think we talked about this before, to eliminate the old Pinochet Constitution and replace it with one that rates people by their groups. In other words, depending what group you belong to, are you straight, you get more if you're gay, you get more if you get other letters, you get more if you're Indian, you get more of this, like all sorts of strata in society that the laws would treat everybody differently. And the Chilean population said, wow, this is a really complex constitution. Look kind of gamed. We like the one that the old dictator wrote because it says we're all equal under the law. So if you're going to commit an axe murder, I don't care what your ethnicity is or what your sex is or what anything is. My whole point is, did the person commit the axe murder? Yes. Boom. So good dictators tend to love their country more than themselves. It doesn't mean they're always warm and fuzzy. They will bust heads. They will kill people. They're trying to create rule of law, stability, order, stuff like that. They allow a number of things to function because they're trying to what? Get there. They'll tend to get rid of corruption because it hurts. Lee of Singapore is the epitome, the highest ideal of this. And his supporters, he would smile if people say you were a dictator. His supporters would be like, no, he was a great man. He was a great man. Singapore is, let's say, flesh pot of Asia. Everything could be bought and sold in Singapore. And Singapore was poor. Basically, it was a city on a rock, depending on trading goods and stuff going through Singapore and transshipping. He's like, okay, I want Singapore to be rich. I basically have gained political control of Singapore, and I look at England and say, I'll do what England does, become rich. I will force them to be that way. And so he literally speaking, he did. He created law and order. He created stability. He created guaranteed private property rights. He actually, the government developed other things of where it taxes the common people so people can have benefits and stuff like that that they want to have. But he has a very free economy. And Singapore is actually what we call a democratic constitutional state now. They have free elections, stuff like that. I point these out because the fact that they made their country better off. U.S. history. Joseph Hooker. This is a good example of good dictator. Now, Joseph Hooker was a Union general. Everybody was called Lincoln a dictator. He was not a dictator. But Hooker said, if a commander wins a battle with his army, the commander can establish himself as a dictator and rule over the country. He'd be so popular. And Lincoln wrote back to General Hooker saying, win the battle, I'll deal with the threat of a dictator. No, but just win the war, which Hooker lost the battle and he got replaced. I can't invent that stuff. What it is, it's a very small arrow key for moving it. Democracy. Now, democracy is 50% plus one. All the power in a democracy, all the power rests in the elected government. I've been saying democracy. All it means 50% plus one. And in a pure democracy, you can do whatever you want as long as you have a majority. In other words, everybody talks about the Nazis got rid of democracy. No, they got rid of democracy in a democratic way. Because what you do, we had a majority of votes, we decided to ban that political party. What'd you do? We had a majority of votes, we decided to get rid of those people over there. What'd you do? We had a majority of votes, we voted on, said these people. In other words, when the Jews lost all rights in Germany, it was actually done legally because nothing constrained the Bundesrat from having that power. Loosely speaking, they can do anything. Now, most countries duplicate British democracy because while it's by culture a constitutional, in other words, in Britain, the British would be, culturally speaking, a constitutional republic because there's certain things they won't do. It's not British. They've started doing them now. Don't get me wrong. These new. But it was set up as democracy. All these 50% plus one. The Gnostic got 50% plus one. They did whatever they wanted because why? It was legal. Democracies can become very capricious. Very, design and take. People running democracy can look and say, I want to loot and pillage other people to make me and my constituents better off. The seeking of that. How do I benefit? And they have little compunction of ripping the economy or the opposition to shreds in order to keep themselves. And they will do it. In fact, a lot of times democracies, they'll decay and they'll become bad dictators. Now, a bad dictators are far more numerous, and they exist to make themselves better off and to secure their positions. All they care about. They'll say they love the country and the people, stuff like that. Your country's poor. It's more dysfunctional. Maduro, who's now the U.S. president, but is even a successor, and before him, Chavez, they basically banned all political opposition. Their opposition, you labor under a two-tier system. This is for them, the heavy laws and penalties on their enemies. Their enemies can't run TV ads, stuff like that, because that might trick and press the people and such. We must have free debate, which means everyone can say what the ruling party says. That kind of situation. Now, bad dictators tend to concentrate all the power in their hands. They tend to move and collect power in the hands of government. That's why bad dictators tend to become socialist or even communist economies, because they want all power under the state. Because then nobody can have an opinion different from them because they have the power. They can break your knuckles using the government to slap you down. And they will tend to surround us. In other words, the dumber the dictator, the lower the people. So, for example, get Napoleon, who's a dictator. I know. Oops, there we go. Oh, fudge. My bad, I hit the allocates. They never let me go back, so it's kind of annoying. I'd love to, but they won't let me. But, an A-class dictator, I'm going to do A-class dictator, but an A-class dictator will hire B-class talent. Because why? Sometimes even A, because they're already A, so no one's better than me. I give Napoleon credit. If Napoleon tended to surround himself with massively capable people. Excellent generals, excellent people of ability. In fact, he'd get upset when people would betray him. Because, I elevated you because you're good at what you do. The only problem he had was the elevated family. And most of his family wasn't that good at much. I'm not being cruel, it's just reality. And so, in bad dictator, they essentially click all the power in the government. That's why bad dictatorships seem to be socialist or even communist governments by nature, because that way no one can displace the bad dictator. A lot of countries slowly change rules because a country say, I might lose political power. We must change the rules so I can't lose political power. I was getting with the fact of, they had California, I think, had an election last week, and they keep discovering new ballots, of which they're going 100% for another person to make sure that the runoff is dominated by the two people they want. In other words, it's still that stuff is really strange. But that's a bad dictator. In Uganda, now when you have a C-class, when you have a C-class bad dictator, they'll hire a bunch of E and F and G and X-class one way down in the food chain, because that way nobody will displace them. So you think about it, you get a very powerful government so you can have power. But you want to be overthrown, so you make sure everybody beneath you is lower skilled than you are, because they won't overthrow you. Okay, now we go to Civil War. Civil War is basically the system is broken down. Your political system is broken down. And so both sides decide to settle it by other means. The American political system broke down. We had a civil war. Let's, hey, we're trying to kill each other. Why? The system broke down. And, we're settling it by, and that happens. That's because remember, this is internal in the country. When your political system breaks down internally, you got that. So, for example, in Britain, they're having a lot of societal breakdown because they have a literal two-tier justice system. In other words, if someone says something bad to you, that's on you. That's your fault. If you say the same thing bad to them, you go to jail because you hurt their feelings. So, like, if you're a Christian, we'll actually do this one. It seems easy. In Britain, you theoretically can protest if you are within range of an abortion clinic in Britain and you are praying. You are showing you're showing pro-life sentiments. They can throw you to jail for that. In fact, one woman they brought to jail who was basically texting online while in her apartment because her apartment was in range of an abortion clinic. The police actually came by and asked her questions and such. Do they apply the law equally? That becomes the question. I'm not being cruel here. I'm pointing out the difficulty. And that can lead to a breakdown in civil war. Now, in civil war, the three types. The first one is territorial type. This is when a section, for reasons that may be political other, they are seceding from you. Now, territorial civil wars tend to be, no pun intended, rather civil. Now, keep in mind, take the U.S. Civil War. We lost somewhere between 700,000 and 800,000 people. Keep in mind, that's, lies, that's men. 98% of the losses were military men, not many civilian casualties, relatively speaking. And keep in mind, the 700,000 figure, dead, that's a nation of 3 million. In other words, 31 million. We lost 2 to 3% of our population in that war. Literally speaking, they get killed in battle, or it's they die of dysentery, stuff like that. That's brutal. So territorial civil wars tend to be very, part of it, because the United States, we had territory, we want to be separate from Britain. The South wanted to be separate from the rest of the United States. These civil wars tend to be very civil. In other words, not many civilian casualties involved. And so they tend to function by rules. Both sides tend to. We don't try to do things. Another example is the Hungarian revolt in 48-49. And heck, at the same time as Hungarians revolted, you had the Venetian and Lombard revolt during the same period, both against the Austrian Empire. A number of people left the Austrian Empire and fled overseas, especially Venetian and Lombardy. They fled to Sardinia and such. They were actually still collecting their money from their states, even though they revolted against someone. So it was very civil. There was no one's going after them. It doesn't say women should not kill. No one's going after them. You're fighting armies. You're battling troops to win your independence or to keep the country unified. And there was this very lot of, no pun intended, civil or good behavior by both sides. Like, good example, United States Civil War, when you had bummers, basically people who fled either army, right? Both the Union Army and the Confederate Army tended to hang bummers of either stripe who committed crimes. Those you could be found, these guys who had, left the other army. They had assaulted somebody or stole stuff. Penalty for that is execution. Either two armies would hang them regardless of what uniform they were wearing because higher principles in terms of, so even that's why I say when I say a civil war, it's actually they're very good. Now we get to messy civil wars. Ethnic conflict. This is a map of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. Yes, it is in Magyar. The reason I go into Magyar, Hungarian, no, I do not speak Hungarian, is due to the fact of it had a full breakdown of the ethnic groups. All those people, all those different colors, different ethnic groups. Ethnic conflict is when the two groups no longer like each other or they hate each other, they don't trust each other. and they desire to exploit each other because it make them better off. A good example of, you can think about how, and through you look up anything, what are called, ethnic grievance-based politicians, always say their group is owed by some other group. For example, for centuries, what was called the Czech Crown Lands didn't have any strife between Czechs and Germans or other groups. The law was equal to the law. You play by the rules. Everybody played by the rules. When you got the rise of Czech politicians who wanted to have their own nation, a nation run by their people for the benefit of their people, stuff like that, you saw the rise of ethnic conflict. Ethnic conflicts can get very mean and nasty because the two groups hate each other. They detest each other. Each one wants the other one what? Pushing up daisies. Now, you can reduce ethnic conflict because you can deport them. So, for example, after the Second World War, all the Germans who lived in the Czech Crown Lands, 3+ million of them, were actually moved out. In other words, they ethnically cleansed them. So now, instead of having that blue, Czechoslovak item with the red, the yellow wrapped around it, the yellow were all deported. They were all ethnically cleansed. 3.5 million people were forced to move out, and it made an ethnically pure Czechoslovak state. So ethnic conflicts can get very, very ruthless. But you can solve them when you can separate the two groups. They stop fighting. They don't like each other, but no one's hurting what? My group, my fellow group members. I won't have to fight you. And so you have ethnic conflict. These people, we can separate them. I'm not in favor of, ethnic cleansing. I'm pointing out ethnic cleansing reduces the chance of ethnic conflict, because with ethnic cleansing, this is my part of the country. All my people moved out of losers into winning years, stuff like that, whatever. But that ethnic cleansing will make it so they don't fight each other. They'll still dislike each other, but there's no fear of the other coming after me. Then there's ideological civil wars. Ideological civil wars are among the most dangerous of civil wars. They are horribly ruthless and harsh. This is like the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution. For example, in the French Revolution, the French government, hammered the Vendée. Because the French Revolution, what they established, don't mind me having my vitamins. So one day, it was very difficult. It always is already. The Vendée, which is a very Catholic region, the French government claimed the right to appoint ministers, priests. And so the government would appoint priests to do the government does. Now, in fairness to poor French, there are people in Connecticut who've been elected to statewide office, Virginia who've been elected to statewide office, even people in a Houston mayor, an Austin mayor, who both said pastors should submit their speeches, their sermons to government for the government to approve, so don't cause, divisiveness and stuff like that. That's an ideological conflict. In Houston, one side decides the other side does not have the right to exist, that their existence is an oppression. And, but they'll say the other side is a threat to human liberty. These two sides have different ideas of right, wrong, good, evil. We talk about equality law. One side's idea of equality law may be the fact of, I rule, everything's set up to benefit me and mine. You cannot have anything. And they will literally look and say, if you have something, that is oppressing them. A lot of countries will say, well, no, equality in the law, make everybody equal, that's oppression, because there's these other things that make it unequal. It's like, and so literally speaking, you can't, that's, depending on, right, wrong, good, and evil, that's, so, you have different ideas of what is right, wrong, good, and evil. And so these things are in conflict. That can lead to an ideological civil war. And the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which is where this picture is about, these people were killed. They were executed because why? The Chinese revolutionaries, they're going through a purification of population. People saying good things about them. And that really ticked off, Pol Pot and other people. And I apologize. I still don't talk. So again, that it's because I was thinking of Cambodia and Hamas. Cambodia made, like I said, eyeglasses made illegal and stuff. Like in the United States, we have people who say giving us Christians equality to them is an oppression to them. Yale Law School says this is an example of law school. Yale and Harvard Law School both say we will not tolerate the intolerant. But if you're not going to tolerate the intolerant, doesn't make you intolerant. No, because we're stopping intolerance. Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense because you destroyed equality law. And that's the point. They don't believe the other side has a right to exist in their presence. These kind of civil wars get really ugly. You'll tend to get them when, again, people say that, if I'm not getting my way, that's oppression. Or we need two different standards to judge people. Okay, your whole country breaks down, everything fails. That is called anarchy. When you hit anarchy, everything has fallen apart. Somalia would be anarchy. Libya today would be anarchy. The country's basically fallen apart, and it's ruled by warlords or street gangs. You theoretically have a government, but you don't have a government. You have, as I said, you have a bunch of local warlords. They're running things. So again, street gangs become it. Haiti's in this category. I'm not being mean. I'm pointing out this is what happens when you get to anarchy. It becomes the rule of the jungle. Whatever you can do, you can take, steal. When you hit anarchy, there's no building, creating, or generating. Everybody loots, steals, and pillages. A totally horrible thing. And now we are talking trade. Now, again, trade, I actually clicked on this. That's why if you have a slight skip over, it's going to be reason. Now, trade is highly debated. In fact, President Trump has been considered very controversial because, he has engaged a number of trade wars. Now, trade on macro level, there's a lot of debate on what trade should be done. We know this is macro level and micro. So at a micro, we dealt with a slightly different direction, more from the narrow country's point of view in terms of why do we engage in this. Here, we'll ask the question of how does trade create and cause economic growth? Because I would say, does trade aid economic growth? Does it make us? Because countries engage in trade, saying how is it going to best aid my nation, my people getting richer? How's it going to live better? And sometimes it's a simple thing. What people forget a lot of times when you have trade, you get cheaper goods and stuff like that, which means people have more money left over to buy other goods, which helps other industries. So how should a nation approach its economic relations with other nations? And this is very important because how are they treating you? How are you going to treat them? What is their objective? What is your objective? How do you hope to make your country richer through trade? And this is always a very important item. A difficult that happens with trade a lot of times, so no matter what policy you pick, excluding kleptocracy, a lot of politicians are very immediately focused. Even populations are, but politicians especially, they want immediate gratification. It hasn't made us rich yet. It should make us rich. And sometimes economists unintentionally foster that when we say, this will make you wealthy. Yes, something will make you wealthy. It may take, it'll improve you slowly over 50 years. It's better than the alternative. But when we say it'll make you wealthy, people think of, boom, I'm going to be like, I'm going to have Irish standard of living, and I am currently Yemen. You won't. It'll improve you over time, particularly. But so they expect too often politicians, less people expect fast, easy results. No pause is going to make you easy, rich quickly. It takes, good policy. It takes time for any good policies and economic actions to bear fruit, to make you better off. And although, like with anything bad actions can kill you real fast. That sounds stupid. Think about it. If you do something stupid, you put your hand on the grill, 3 seconds of action. No, I never done that. Take up both hands. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Both of them. 3 seconds of action. Several months of surgery. Good job. Former student of mine, great guy. 6 weeks before his wedding, he got distracted while using a table saw and went right through his hand. Went right through his left hand. Went slunk. They put everything back together, but it took months before he could move again. I mean, in fact, he couldn't put his ring on his hand when he got married. He had to have it hung around his neck like he was Frodo Baggins. Fortunately enough, it was not the Ring of Sauron, and his wife is a very sweet person. They have 3 little girls. But that's just what happened. One mistake, boom, you same thing. You do bad policies can boogaloo you real fast. Good policies, good actions take time. And that makes sense. It's easy to go in the PPF. You just have to mess things up. Going out the PPF, making it expand outward, that takes a lot of work. And that takes time. So it's that's the situation we have there. Don't mind me, I'm just trying to get to the next slide. Let's see. Now on the next slide. Sorry about that. It took a bit to reset. It's because it wanted to exit and restart. It's okay. Thank God. Okay, now let's look at the policies we have, the kind of policies you can engage in, what the policies can do. And it resized my pictures again. Hey, how it does that. Now, the first one's called free trade. This is the free movement of goods and services, and maybe even capital between nations. Nations in free trade, ideal free trade, nations play by the same rules. We're not trying to cheat each other. We're not trying to hurt each other. You can sell to me. I can sell to you, stuff like that. Now, this is an anti-free trade cartoon. This cartoon is an anti-free trade cartoon by the British. Now, by people in Britain who didn't want free trade. And so they're talking, they're calling John Bull's dumping ground. Every other country can dump their waste there. There's the British, John Bull. In fact, during the 19th century, 18th, 19th, early 20th century, the British icon was the prosperous merchant businessman with a top hat and a coat and everything like that, because British prosperity extended to all Britons. And so people create prosperity. Let's talk about now free trade. I can sell to you, you can sell to me. A point that's often forgotten about free trade. And so, you raise this is Britain from the end of the wars with France and their time, in the Napoleonic Wars, 1815 to 1848, had what were called corn laws. In other words, they had laws like this is talking about. They had things that restricted imports. So Britain could not import food. So Britain, which is the world's best manufacturer, was tying up a lot of resources, capital, money, stuff like that, physical capital, money, and then growing food. But Britain is not great for food. So during this time period, British workers, even though they were among the highest paid workers in the world, British workers, like, boom, they're high paid. But among workers, they were the lowest actual standard living workers among industrialized workers. In other words, British workers would be being paid more than their French, German, American counterparts in the same industries. But their French, German, American counterparts would be living immensely better. And so you had, during these 3 decades, you had a lot of agitation among workers feeling like they're getting ripped off. And it's because of the fact of they had to buy food internally. Britain is not exactly a great place for growing food. Well, in 1848, Britain repealed the corn laws. These are the laws saying we must be self-sufficient food, stuff like that, and other goods. When they did that, Britain, yes, And I notice all these things, most of these things say made, manufactured, something else. But, they say a lot of things in terms of Britain all of a sudden started getting products cheaper. But what people forget is when Britain started to import these goods, British food prices dropped by over 50%. And it was literally speaking, the British workers were paying over half. It's just, well, it just says how much their income standard living. They were paying over half their income on food. In other words, they were living less well than their American, their French, German counterparts. They were spending half their income on food because food was so expensive. When imports came in, the cost of food cut in half, 1/3 of what it was. British workers' standard of living jumped by over 50%. So all of a sudden, I'm employing workers at a textile mill. I don't have to change their salary 1 inch. Boom! Already they are living better. In fact, this is an immediate gain from trade for Britain. They were buying in. In fact, Denmark did this with trade. The Danes said, you know what? We will import grain from Russia and Germany. We will engage in beef products, dairy products and beef products. Sell our milk, cheeses, hams and stuff like that to Britain and France and the such, and Netherlands, Belgium, and we'll make money that way. So, but for the British workers and British manufacturing, British workers, all of a sudden, instead of spending half their income on food, we're now spending 20% on food, and they were getting better food. This is when your British workers started getting taller. They started getting husky. They started, fewer of their children were dying from malnutrition and stuff like that. So the advent of free trade, the working class was people worried about constantly. You see in Dickens novels, their misery declines immensely. They actually start getting a better standard of living. And that was an immense thing. That was a massive improvement. In fact, that was straight specialization for Britain. And then Britain had the dynamic improvement. Britain was no longer spending an inordinate amount of resources trying to make marginal farmland work. Why were we trying to make marginal farmland work? The price of food was so high, it made sense to go, I'm going to dredge that ugly swamp. Well, it's a peat swamp. The soil's not going to be that good. Well, I know that. But with the price of grain at 4 times the world average, that makes more sense than building a steel plant. Even though a steel plant would have more productivity, the government, the trade restrictions distorted prices. Shared specialization. Each country's doing what they do best. That allows people to live better because each one's dedicating the resources to where they're most productive. And we win. We go, yes, 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 yes. Ooh, 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 ooh. Love it. And then you get the dynamic improvement. Now, dynamic improvement, again, we see McCluskey's theorem. The dynamic improvement is, as I compete against other countries, I learn, I get better. How do they do things? How do they improve that? And they adapt, they improve, they jack forward, they get better at it. And you see this massive acceleration of things. And so you get a giant dynamic improvement for the population, for the people and such. So free trade among economists, because of the English case and what happened, free trade is viewed most positively. In other words, we say, yes, getting free trade, that's on average the better system. Particularly, it's on average the better system for everybody involved on a global level. If everybody engages in free trade, if all the countries engage in free trade, the pie gets bigger. In other words, at a global level, this may be the global pie. We engage in free trade. All the countries do. This becomes, I know it's an ugly pie. That becomes the global pie. So we have a bigger items to get from this. So a lot of economists, why we like free trade. Now, the other ways looking at trade is what's called mercantilism. Now, mercantilism, trade is war by other means. My objective is to make my country richer. I want to get most or all the gains from trade. I don't want the other guys. I don't care about the other guys. I'm not there. This example of China has a mercantilist power. The Chinese are not worried about these countries and making deals with getting anything. In fact, they want to make sure that when you trade, the other guy gets that, and this is me. Or even if you're manipulating it well, the other guy gets negative. They get negative numbers. And so I'm getting a bigger share of things. Because in mercantilism, my objective is to grow and expand my country. The other countries are irrelevant. In fact, a lot of times I will engage in operations to gain control of that other country to where they, they owe me. For example, a number of countries have been expanding their ports, redoing their ports and their airports, right? And the Chinese lend the money for it. The Chinese will lend the money. They say, our stipulation is that you must use Chinese firms to build these ports and airports. Okay? So you borrow money from China to improve your ports and airports so you can trade better, and even your factory stuff like that. I'm using ports and airports because it's one to see each one they do. The Chinese have loaned you the money, so it feels like, well, I'm getting the money to come from China. That's great. Throw in a little bit of corruption, a lot of corruption. Now, what happens then is politics take bribe, kickback. They end up very rich, and you get cost overruns, stuff doesn't get built, things get delayed. Then the Chinese say you haven't paid the loans. Because you haven't paid the loans, we are now taking control of this airport. We are now taking control of this port. Once they have control of those things, goods coming in and out of your country, the Chinese are running facilities. They're owning it basically now, and they can determine which countries can basically bring goods in, which would be, only a Chinese company, and where you can export goods to, which will only be China, unless China feels you export somebody else is okay for them. Now, there's two general ways this stuff. I've been talking about both of them. Growth. Now, the idea behind growth is I want to grow. I want to sell to you. I don't want to buy to you. If I'm buying from you, I'm not making goods. If I'm not making goods, we don't see our income's rising, we lose. So I just want to sell to you. The only thing I will buy from you will be raw materials, certain things I can't make, or even capital equipment because, I may need to get the equipment so I can build things and such. But I just want to sell to you because selling creates greater growth. Go back to Keynesian model. X is a positive. When I'm selling to others, I'm getting this. So I want to sell them. Now, tied in with that, a further development of the positive is called destroy yours. My objective there is to destroy your industry, to annihilate your industry, wipe it out, make your industry move to my country. And this is done a lot of times where it's not just the idea of I'm just going to sell to you. It's the idea of let's say you want to sell, your Boeing wants to sell planes in China. China will say, if you want to sell planes in China, any plane sold in China must be built in China. So Boeing's like, well, I have factories. Yes, put those factories in China. You'll get sales in China. So Boeing may spend $5 billion building factories they don't need in China so they can build planes in China and thus sell planes to China and make money. But that meant they shut down a factory in Seattle. But that was the Chinese objective, to have them shut down the factory in Seattle. So now the Chinese got the capital they couldn't get and learning how to build planes better. But then they do this one. These countries, I want, when you're doing your plans, this is show yours. If you want to sell to, everything you sell to these countries must come from me. So I want you to move your plants that sell to these countries, manufacturers that sell to those countries, move it to my country because it might be more jobs, more income. And if you say no, I go to that firm and say, under my constitution, it is illegal for a foreign firm to own land, factory, plant, equipment. I can enforce my constitution against you. You will lose $3 billion worth of investment, and then you have to go to your shareholders and say, I'm sorry, I lost $3 billion. You're going to get fired. But once your industry is destroyed, once I destroy your shipping industry or steel or meat packer, machine tools, you don't have that industry anymore, but you need these resources. In other words, you need these goods. So what happens is you don't have them anymore. You need these goods. You go and do what? You buy them from the other guy. You don't develop this industry again because when you were good at this, you lost the competition because the government will aid that firm fighting it. The government will write checks for it. The government will give it, increased capacity. And the government writing checks for people is very, very important because It makes it easier for a country to win, for a firm to win, when the government is underwriting them. Now, the other thing that's helped when you have that is if the other countries have heavy corruption, then all I have to do, if these are the leaders of the country, I just need to bribe them, and they will let me exploit their country. Because why? Hey, they have $1 billion mansion. They got Swiss bank accounts with hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in there. They're cool. Well, sure, the people being exploited, but they're gonna live well. And it's easy to get politicians to lie to themselves, particularly corrupt politicians, because they're out for themselves. Import substitution. This one is different from the other two. The first one is I want to engage in free trade to make myself better off. The second one is I want to use trade to make my country better off. This one is I don't want anything to do with other countries. I want us to have jobs and income. I want to isolate my economy from other countries' economies so we can have larger growth. I tie into other economies. They have leverage over me. I'm stuck in a tough situation. I may not like that. But if I'm just to myself, dealing with myself, then that's easier to do. That's simpler to do. And so we have, that situation we call, import substitution to achieve this kind of policy. Again, I'm not going to be importing from foreigners. Let's look at this cartoon here. This is one of import substitution. If we have free trade, all my workers lose their jobs, they're unemployed, they have nothing. When we have restrictions, what they call tariff reform, hey, all the workers are going to have jobs, they have good wages, they're going to all live great. Now, remember, imports are going up, so things are going to be far more expensive, or can be, depending on what you're fighting. Now, import substitution, if you're facing mercantilism, import substitution makes sense. A lot of people say, hey, this has been done. In fact, a lot of countries look and say, the United States in the 19th century and Germany in the 19th century both engaged in import substitution. They both created tariffs. They had tariff walls. I'm sorry, the settling of my legs a bit. They had tariff walls to restrict imports. It was that you couldn't just ship things into the United States or Germany. They actually, both countries had tariffs. And they were done to protect domestic industry. To do what this picture's saying, and what the square thing, everybody's saying we have good wages, stuff like that. To pull this off, this can be done because it has been. The Americans and Germans did it. In fact, a lot of times people look at the Americans and Germans and say, we want to do that too. Except they tried and it doesn't work. And the rationale is actually simple. To pull this off, because I'm not going to engage the rest of the world, I'm going to basically restrict from them. I must have a very large economic country. A large economic country so I can achieve economies of scale. So we can make things. Remember the problem with the British workers? They had no good farmland, so their food was 1-2 times more expensive than the world level of food. And once you had those trade restrictions removed, the workers were saving so much money, they were buying more goods. In other words, once Britain, we're going back to free trade, once Britain got rid of the Corn Laws, British workers were buying newspapers, they were buying magazines, they were buying crystal, they were buying books. In other words, they were getting shoes, they were buying other things Britain made. All that money they used to spend on food, they could now what? Spend on other things the British were making. So the British became wealthier. This is arguing the other point. Now pull this off again. You have to be a large country, so I have areas where they can grow food and stuff like that. So you can achieve economies of scale and a lot of industry and be very competitive. In other words, my internal market is going to be very competitive and drive prices down. I also must have a small government. Itsy bitsy, teeny weeny. A little bitty government. Oh, I'm wiping it out. Oh, that may fit with it too. But, I must have a small government. My government must be very teeny. And the United States had that in the 19th century. Even the Germans did by today's standard. But you have a small, constrained government. Okay, those are the three policies that make sense. A lot of countries, in fact, the majority of countries, have no defined policy. This is where the United States had been forever. We had no real government. We said we were a free trade country, not free trade. It's not because we were trying to cheat anybody or anything like that. It's because we were weak-kneed. And weak need, and a lot of times said weak need is when the country's leaders can be rolled and pushed around by others. Once I know I can cheat you, other people will cheat me because they'll make their nation, their people better off. So this is why I have this cartoon here. If it's Chinese Ministry of Trade, obedience is important to us. To grovel, press 1. To beg, press 2. To submit, press 3. To hear these options, we're gonna and so weak need is literally speaking, the country rolls over and plays dead. Your leadership doesn't want to do that. Everybody, in fact, hears constantly, oh, we'll have trade war. Trade war will be the Great Depression. The Great Depression. It'll be a Great Depression if we have trade war. The world will end. I'm a country who's trying to cheat with mercantilism. I'll even say that. You're trying to cause the Great Depression. You're trying to cause trade war. And I know I am cheating you. I don't care. What's better for my country, my people? And so when you have weak need, your country's leaders can be rolled over. Erratic. Now, erratic is the fact. Remember, politicians want instant gratification. Everything should work now or yesterday or immediately, stuff like that. And reality doesn't work because you have to build, produce, and generate. Well, countries will keep changing their trade policy, which is a killer. When countries change their trade policy, that is decimating on domestic industry. In other words, it would be better for a country, especially had no corruption, to stay import substitution, even though that's may not be the best policy. If they were on it and stayed that way for 20 years, all the firms know how to function. If I keep changing my policy every 2 years, how does a firm adjust to a policy? How do I know what I need to do, what the law is going to be when the government's changing every time they change government? So we were mercantilism before. So I worked on developing steel cheaply, and the government was going to write me checks to export steel. So I was doing that. Then they shifted 2 years later, and we're going to allow free trade. Well, I'm not good at steel compared to the Japanese or the Germans. If I knew we were going to be free trade, I wouldn't invest in steel. But the government was, writing me checks to invest in steel, but not going to write me checks anymore. So I go bankrupt because why? I didn't know what the rules were going to be because they changed them. They alter the rules. And that can be a killer. When the government constantly shifts and alters rules, it's a killer. Imagine in any sport, I usually use sports, they change the rules constantly. How do I know how to play or use the sport when they keep changing the rules? Heck, rule changes that go back decades, still unsettled. I'm not being cruel here. I'm pointing out, the impact. The most dangerous thing is kleptocratic. In other words, trade exists for the rulers to make money. In other words, money's going through trading, and the government takes bribes, kickbacks, stuff like that. In other words, ruled by the corrupt. And so, other countries internally, externally bribe rulers to get special deals, special arrangements because they can. The rulers like it because they become very wealthy. So, in fact, kleptocratic is worse than erratic because you're getting none of the benefits of trade, and the rules will tell the population it's because the foreigners are exploiting you. When it's like, no, your domestic government's ripping you off, but you don't realize that, and the government runs everything, so you can't be told that. Okay, let's do this. Remember we talked about Ehrlich, overpopulation. Remember his thing was, we'll have the population bomb. There'll be the great die-offs of the great starvation of the 1970s, and then the great die-offs of the 80s, 1980s, 1970s, in case you're wondering. And then when he did this interview in the Knots, oh, if there was one thing I was wrong about my book, I was too optimistic. It's like, no, dude, you were wrong. You were wrong. I pick on constantly because he was wrong. Now, the concept of overpopulation is rather simple. It goes back to Malthus in 1820. In fact, he was so depressed, the guy Malthus, writing on overpopulation, that people in British Palm would see him come and go, oh, there's that gloomy guy again. Let's go away from him. Now, his idea is, what he raised was, He did not understand technology, so he believed food production could only increase incrementally. He was using as example Britain under the Corn Laws. There was even way about trade rates. Like they said, well, we can't feed ourselves because food's getting scarcer and more expensive. So the population is increasing faster than food. Yes, because we won't import food. And keep in mind, technology, to give you an idea of food, because Malthus did the idea of, look at it, that's the way population is going up in that crazy chart. But food is doing this. And see, we're short food. Well, wait a minute. The United States has more farmers than we had in 1820, but we grow more food. In fact, we have less farmers, we have more farmers 1820, less farmers today, but we grow more food. Today to 1900, we have less land under cultivation today than we did in 1900. But we grow immensely a lot more food. And keep in mind, these are all cases which the United States population, is today 360 odd million, give or take a few. And 1820 was like 7 million. And 1900 was about 70 million or 80 million. That's a big difference. So our food production actually increased faster than our population. But overpopulation, food always go fast. Population always go faster because land's constrained. They're forgetting what? Technology, capital, human capital, those things to innovate, develop, and improve. In fact, the only reason food production at times goes down in the United States is because you have billionaires buying land in the name of saving the environment. I know I like picking on those guys because the fact of they're sticking to common people. In fact, the funny thing I mentioned before was Bill Gates' crushed bugs are going to cost about $50 a pound. He's like, why can't the government write me a check so he can subsidize so people can eat bugs because that'll save the planet because bugs are cheaper. If they're costing $50 a pound, they're not cheaper. I'm not being cruel. I'm being, accurate. So the idea of overpopulation is our population increases, it puts an overextension on the planet, on resource, something that's going to break. We're going to do a number of points here. And I apologize, Tisto. Tilt over because they're. So I said, and that cartoon, The Polished Bible Ehrlich, is a great example of that cartoon. See, people living on it, we destroyed the earth, it looks ugly, future stuff like that. So in their viewpoint, and these are points I've gotten from Mark, which I have, attached, not, in the PowerPoint, not in the PowerPoints, in Canvas, is the idea we must limit population because of these things. Resource limited. The earth is a sphere. The earth is a nice little happy ball sphere, and it's only so big, so we're limited. Growth strains thing. In other words, when you have economic growth, it puts more strain on everything, so you must limit economic growth, population growth. There are water limits. The places are running out of water, and so we must limit, population growth so we don't use up too much water because we run out of fresh water and stuff like that. Climate change. Now, I always dislike climate change because it's like climate change. Well, that means anything. It's cold day. Climate change. There's no change. It's climate change. It's warm day. It's climate change. In other words, it explains everything, which means, to quote from Einstein, anything that explains everything explains nothing. In other words, no matter what happens, it proves the theory, then that's not a theory. That's not knowledge. And keep in mind, Einstein was not in my side of the table. He would be a neo-Keynesian, a socialist by temperament. But he's just pointing out, since we won't find anything about climate change because go back to the fact we banned the naysayers. Political instability will be caused by population. We must limit population because more people will cause political instability. And we're going to deal with that one because it does, but it's going to be caused in a lot of different ways. You'll have more economic, when you have a large population, you have more economic problems and more crime. You can, yes. And there'll be other species will be extinguished by the human beings, taking up, more aspect life, going to squeeze out a lot of little species out there. Sloths, owls, who knows what. Although when they say gnats, it really ticks me off because you're kind of funny. Okay, now many advocates, including Paul Ehrlich of hard pollution control, have advocated hard pollution. You can't just convince people to have children, because then they'll say this one: the wrong people are having children. All those Christians are having children, but none of us good atheists and LGBTQ2 plus people are having children. Well, yes, if you're alternatively preference and you're married, it's very difficult to have children because why? You married someone of the same sex and you can't reproduce for reasons I need to explain. If you need that explained to you, go see Christian Studies. They'll explain it all in detail. A lot of them will advocate hard control. Now, hard control is the fact of the government will limit people having children for the betterment of all. But then you have to ask the question of, is the government, which is an inefficient creature, capable of doing this? Can we trust the government to limit the population growth rate? And thing I have next slide there, can we expect to do it fairly? Like people would say, hey, that's the whole Holocaust. The Germans just occupying population control growth to save the world. Now, this are examples of hard child. China, decades ago, went to what was called a one-child policy. In China, if you lived in a city, you could have one child. If you're in the countryside, you could have two. And so what happened in China is, one, China now has built in, because of this policy, a birth pyramid that looks like that. In other words, Chinese population is started to decline already because they don't have very few children, relatively speaking. They have more, 20s, a lot more people in their 30s and 40s, a lot more people in the 50s, and then when you hit the 60s, you got, not quite the large cohort, but getting there. Those Chinese 60-year-olds are already more numerous than the 1 to 10-year-olds. So China restricted population growth to, protect the environment, stuff like that, so we have better standard of living. But then this also happened. You can now have in China, like in many developing countries, there's big emphasis on having a boy to carry the family name. Now, China, in fairness to China, sex selection abortions were banned in China. India also banned them. Both of them allow abortion on demand. Both of them ban sex selection abortion. But there's a preference for boys in China, India, and other places. So when a woman's pregnant with her first child, if it's a girl, they get rid of it, they abort it, because they get one doctor to say what the baby is, they go to another doctor and say we can't afford it economically. And so they get rid of the girl. That way they can try to have with them one child, a boy, because the father wants to carry on his name. And so what does that do, though? Now, in the countryside, you have the same thing, except for a lot of times they let the second child be a boy or a girl. We have the same impact. The government is choosing who may and may not have children, who can have children, who cannot have children. And it's limiting. That one child appearance. The Chinese have a big birth gap. And you cause the fact that they are short boys. Strike that verse, they're short girls. In fact, the wiki, which is very much, Wikipedia, which is very much in the early camp of how things should be run, will say when people reveal, even though a country may have 1.15 boy births for every one, it's 115 boy births for every 100 girl births. Oh, that's natural. There are always more boys born. That's just the way it is. No. Yes, but if you go back in European records, Japanese records, to the turn of the 18th and 19th century, a lot of countries kept records for a long time, you would find something like this. Number of baby boy births, 100.5. Number of baby girl births, 100. Now, if you get 115 boys for every 100 girls, guess what? That ain't natural. See that over on the left? That's natural. But Wikipedia, wants to control. No, they can't help that, and also the Chinese don't want to look bad. So that causes Chinese now have a big population hole that they can't come out of quickly. The government may choose who may and who may not have children. In the previous slide, the German government could just say, well, Jews can't have children. That's it. That'll make them all die out. I'm not advocating it. I am pointing it out. When the government can control whether or not you have children, there is no right, no privilege, nothing you have, they can't take away from you in the name of saving the planet or the world or whatever's happening. Because why? They control whether or not you can have a child. If they can control whether or not you have a child, they can control anything you do. They can dictate anything you do because it's for the greater good. See, I mean, we went and ripped out, male and female body parts to save the planet. So if you want to do a ski vacation, same risk, we're probably going to restrict that too. So there's no right way. You've given the government the ability to do whatever they want to do, and they can squeeze you, and they will. The funny thing is, the government squanders more resources than every other entity. The government, in other words, people say, we're going to save the environment, we're going to save this. The government is a resource-wasting machine. Because remember, the government has no way of measuring efficiency, and someone else is paying. Even before you get an ego government officials, that's going to be there. I use this one going back. This goes back a decade and change. When the first day of that time, we talk about government lines, ends. Doing a trip to Africa for a month. That was a very resource-intensive trip. Consumes a lot of resources, creates a lot of pollution, generating no output. Why is the government do it? Well, the first lady want to. People say, "Oh, private sector people doing that." When it's private sector, I'm doing it with my own money. Very important difference. When you spend someone else's money, you can get very wasteful. Remember, again, the hours I point this out because this is what the government did. And the funny thing is, the people who want to save the world, resource depletion, overpopulation, only communism can save us. You must use it's coming from government officials, military generals, high government officials, stuff like that. You must give us all the power to save the planet. It's for your own good that we're going to be beating you with a stick or a bag of bricks, as Leo says. That was brought to you. Look at that. That was brought to you by a command economy. You really think they're going to be able to save the environment, stuff like that? No. But they will lust after and try to keep their power, and they'll get used to blaming other people because it works. So the question is, would you give the politicians that kind of power? We said before. What if they don't like you? What if I'm on the outs? I'm Christian. United States, I'm Christian. Hollywood hates my people. You know, some idiot doing the Supergirl movie who, believes, Christian fathers, I'm going to teach your daughters to hate you, and they're going to be embracing values and beliefs you don't like. And now she's whining, people should be seeing my movie. It's oppression. How many standards of justice does that woman believe in? 2. 1 for her, because she's nobility. She was on Games of Thrones playing nobility, killing people. And, 2, 1 for the peasants. What does it say about this one? What does it say about the value of human life? Your government, in the name of freedom, in the name of, saving the world, can take any right you have, and they can kill off human beings to save the world. Okay, let me take that to its extreme. Yes, global warming is a problem. The United States has decided to solve it. We're using stealth neutron bombs, and we're dropping them all over all the other countries and wiping out all their people. The beautiful thing about a neutron bomb is it kills the people, leaves everything else behind. We've solved overpopulation. Went from 8 billion to 360 odd million. We win. Oh, how can you say that? That's horrible. No, I'm pointing out, did you solve the overpopulation problem? Yes. That's hard control. What you just said, other people do not have lives. When people elevate animals, and I have nothing against protecting them, but I'm pointing out, animals are not people. You got some idiot running a text saying, and animals are people too. And when we restrict people eating meat, all the animals thank us too because our four-legged brothers are just the same. It's like, dude, are you snorting crack? Okay, you actually snort cocaine, smoke crack. You think you're doing both of them. While downing hard liquor, popping a lot of different colored pills, and probably missed a few things, and smoking weed. I mean, you have no rights a lion respects. If you run across a lion in the wild, the lion's going to say, cracks its knuckles or its claws and says, look at that. Soft, chewy, no fur, no fangs, no claws. This is going to feel good. But the lion worried about, oh, I'm killing a point. No, the lion's not going to say, it's going to say what? Lunch. So you can never make people and animals equal. The only way you can make them equal is you take people and lower them down to animals. Because animals cannot become people. And when you lower people down to animals, other people, the ones way up in power, they gain power. They gain the power to treat humans like animals. Heck, in the name of, theoretically, now I point this out, many, actually all socialist countries see a drop in their, principles. Basically, we talked about this before. They've killed off, it just really ticks me off. They killed off the Down syndrome babies. In fact, this idiot couple, millionaire couple, like, oh, we discovered we were having a Down syndrome child, so we aborted it because it would have a horrible life. You're millionaires. Now, who are they killing off? Who are these left-wing screwballs killing off? A small child. Because they had what? A life not worth living. You know who put life not worth living? The Nazis did when they'd run all their eugenic propagandas in the 1930s. There's words for it, I just can't, do that. So it gives other men the power to treat humans like animals. We lose rights. We lose equine law, which is destructive. Prince Philip, he died a decade and change ago, but he was, Queen Elizabeth's husband. All right, and this is a guy who fought in the Second World War. He fought the Nazis. The weird German dude with a weird mustache, psychotic. He wished, he goes, and I think, King Charles now wished the same thing. When I die, I wish to come back as a bacteria virus to kill the surplus population. Hitler agreed with him. Hitler wanted to kill the surplus population. Prince Philip is a bloody Nazi. And if he's in the other place roasting on the barbie, I'm not crying for it because he'll be there with his buddy Adolf. Because think about it. He just really said, "Oh, let's kill all these people." I say this hyperbole. I say it because that's where his ideology, would go to. He'd be the first one to whine if the United States had dropped, neutron bombs all over, place and gotten rid of 7 billion human beings because, well, they weren't the right people you were killing. I should be choosing who gets killed. No, we're killing you too. But that's what I mean. I'm too special. I'm royalty. See what you've done? You've destroyed the value of human life. Genocide becomes so easy because why? We're saving the planet. We're doing things. We're treating people like crud. Britain a few years ago ran commercials which people who did not agree with climate change and was people who opposed, just debate, discussion, stuff like that, where someone would press a button and kill them. Literally speaking, you have somebody pressing a button, the person would explode. So say, well, I don't really believe in climate change. Boom. Wow, you really gonna convince people to believe it? No, but using force. Ruthless force. You don't even have logic on it. You could discuss this thing. No. Once I tell people they can't live well, they might not like the policies because the policy is going to create a diversity, equity, inclusion system. It's going to make everybody have the same slice of pie. And then a few of us rule over them all. That's why you have so many YouTubers going like, commie blocks were good. No, they weren't. We tried commie blocks in the United States. That's what people forget. It was called federal housing. They were actually built a little bit better than commie blocks. People did what? They wrecked them. Think about the impact of that. I'm sorry. We lied to you. Soft control. phlegm. Soft control. Boy, say pause. It's like, oh, let's redo the slide again. Sigh. Why am I looking a little fuzzy? I mean, I don't want to scare you the way I look, but okay, no. Soft control is you change the culture where people no longer want to have children. People considered babies considered parasites, and people get. What happens is your population learns if you won't have children, if you won't sacrifice for children, your population is going to live for today. What would be good for me now, and there'll be no self-sacrifice, no giving of others. A lot of people want self-sacrifice. What they usually mean is, that person over there should sacrifice for my goal, my dream is worth whatever they're going to pay for it. You get a lot of that. I said I've picked on a lot of Hollywood stars. They all have that kind of, what's called luxury beliefs in which other people should suffer so they can live good and feel good about themselves. The funny thing is, people say, well, it's going to save the climate. Dinks, double income, no children, or no kids, consume more resources, the same income level, than people who have children. They farm more, they generate more waste, more of everything. The only thing people with children do is actually they consume more food. They tend to travel less, they drive less, stuff like that. People with children have less of an impact. The funny thing is dinks are more likely, people who have not had children, more likely demand, and this again, no self-sacrifice, demand that other people's children should pay for them to have lavish retirements. They deserve to have Social Security with everything. They should have coverage for everything. They're owed everything. They should be given to me. It's like, wait a minute, you had no children. In fact, if a person had no children, they shouldn't even get Social Security, because why? All the money they could have spent on children, since they have any children, they could have been putting that in investments and retire with a big pot of money. They should be able to pay for themselves. They should not be saying my children should be paying higher taxes and supporting them when they couldn't even be bothered with raising children. Now let's go to the one I was just finished on when I got the thumbball. This case always ticks me off, and this is like brutal. There was a Fulbright scholar. Fulbright. No words for it. But this young woman, when she was in high school, came into an emergency room and said, I am bleeding. And they examined and they said, where is the baby? She goes, there's no baby, I am bleeding. They never found out what happened to that baby, because they can tell when someone's giving birth. Well, 2 years later, she's in college. A homeless man. Now keep in mind, this is a homeless man, all right? When you are homeless, you have all sorts of problems because you're homeless. You have economic problems. You probably have, mental problems. You may have struggled with drug and alcohol and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not saying this to pick on a homeless man. I am to show you how higher this homeless man is. This guy who had nothing in his life is to this woman. He was scrubbing through dumpsters. He heard a baby crying. Think about that. You're a homeless man looking through dumpsters for food and stuff like that, or other things to try to keep yourself warm, whatever it is, and you hear a baby crying. The homeless man picks up the abandoned newborn baby who is left to die, wraps it up, and seeks to go to the hospital and police station saying, someone left a baby in the garbage can. Can someone help this baby? Think about how much higher he is on the food chain than the baby's mother, who was willing to kill that baby because it was going to inconvenience her. In fact, when the straight comes said, no, don't touch this poor woman. It would have ruined her life. She has a right to life. Well, she could prevent the whole thing. Don't do something there. You spit. And she did twice. In fact, she was in one of the other hospitals going, you have, God doing the same thing. You have given birth. Where is the baby? I didn't give birth. I'm just bleeding. I have a bad period. No. You gave birth. Where is the baby? I have no baby. This also happened in South Carolina, the Bilo Center in South Carolina. Well, it's not the Bilo Center anymore, but I just remember from it, But this happened there. A janitor went into a woman's bathroom and found a baby in a toilet. Fortunately, the baby didn't live. I mean, that's brutal. we did discuss a minute ago the killing of Down syndrome babies. We talk about those, the thing about these 2 millionaire YouTubers who discover they're having Down syndrome babies. So we can't have that. They will won't have a life worth living. Yeah, I said before, that's the freaky German dude said, and it makes me want to make really bad words and gestures. So I apologize. You gotta pray for me that, for the wine bad words and gestures and stuff like that, not for being upset about someone wanting to kill off babies because they're not perfect. Well, puggy them. Sorry, it makes me want to, quote, you know, Christmas Carol when, the Ghost of Christmas Present, which I haven't, on, a link, and this is the thing about cultural degradation when he says, and maybe in the eyes of heaven you have less worth than millions like that small child. That's morality. That's high principle. Sorry. Give me a second. I apologize. Selective reduction. This happens all the time when people have twins or triplets, and they'll, reduce them because, it'd be so hot. There's a case decade and change ago of a doctor, not a doctor, not medical doctor, a professor in the New York, system, New York college system, who found herself, she was pregnant with triplets. And she's like, no, I can't have triplets. It's like, it'll ruin my lifestyle. It might ruin my body and make my body look ugly and stuff like that. So she had selective reduction. She killed off 2 of the children. It's funny. She was self-proclaimed feminist. Was a big feminist. She killed off the 2 girls. Left the boy. Well, that way that child knows they're loved. No, what does that child know? My mother was willing to kill my 2 little sisters because they were inconvenient. So if I'm not really good, my mother may kill me too. That's what that child learns. You're only useful if you fulfill the right role for your parent. You have no independent worth beyond. That's what you're selecting. You are turning selfishness into a virtue. And I mentioned already, these people become more entitled. Oh, here we do again. I gotta remember how in the world to do this. Let's see. This is what happens. I mean, I'm using the function thing. Nature pours a vacuum. This is a funny thing, but nature pours a vacuum. The Earth's been depopulating for decades, but the European population is actually higher than it was, 20, 30 years ago. Because you're seeing when you reduce your population, you create a vacuum, and nature pours a vacuum. New, more motivated people move into the vacuum. And as these people from other places have moved in Europe because of the vacuum, this vacuum, this space of thing, you're seeing a rise of crime. Europe has more anti-Semitism now in terms of actions, Jewish people being stabbed, attacked, stuff like that, synagogues being burned, than they've had since the 1930s. And the vast majority of it, 90% is because of what? The new immigrants. And so you're changing it. Yes, now you're getting population disruption because why? The new immigrants and the existing population have a different idea of what is right, wrong, good and evil, which way should we do things, stuff like that. And they're having a collision. They're having a disruption over it. What is right? What is not right? And so they're having, a battle over issues. In fact, in all of these countries, there have been, a lot of people coming in view the native population, especially native girls who are in their, preteens and teen years, has perfectly attackable because those are infidel women, and we can do whatever we want to the infidel women because they're infidels. And they rape them. And when they've raped them, especially in Britain, the government did nothing about it because it might make the immigrants look mad and they'll get upset, and they don't want to look bad and get them upset. So imagine a 12-year-old, you were gang raped, and then the policeman and the social worker says, well, you probably led them on. you're probably just a cheap young woman, and just admit you like sleeping with them, and you liked enticing those older men to attack you. What? Is that going to cause social disruption, battles, and fighting and stuff like that? Yes. And so their declining populations did not achieve things. In fact, Spain is the funny thing in Spain, even before they had the migration surge in, the Spanish were having to think. In fact, one of the reasons they wanted a migrant surge in is Spain was engaging in overbuilding, in which you're building more housing than you had people for. Well, yeah, but the people building things want to build things, and so you import a population directly buy the houses. The problem is the population importing live off the government, so they can't what? They can't afford to buy the house and stuff like that. So you get an ethnic graphic crisis. Now I'm going to borrow from Julian Simon here. The free market or market-based economy, basically, I guess you could say towards the new classical line, will basically say if the government stays out of this, the free market economy will solve overpopulation far better than any government control, any intellectual control. A lot of intellectuals want to control because they think they're the bigger brain. The free market will solve it because it's saying I have to figure out how things work, to find the best way, and people duplicate it. Markets will solve, we like to talk about solving resource issues, right? They also solve population limitations. Development of, the best housing and stuff like that has been done by the private sector, where you have limited housing and stuff like that. Take New York City. New York City has been 8 million people for 100 years. And they have a 1% vacancy rate. You get the social media says, well, I'm just going to make it all work because I'm so brilliant. I can just dictate and decree it because I am the mayor. I'm a Nepo baby. I love picking on being a Nepo baby. He called himself a Nepo baby, so I'm just going with it. Imagine going out of your college and the first job you're getting because your mother's producer at Disney is a several job paying several $1 million a year because your mother's producer at Disney. That's a Nepo baby. In fact, keep in mind, it's not his mother's money. It's not like you're working your parents' machine shop and you're like, no. It's what? It's shareholders' money. Somebody else's money. But markets will solve these problems. Because, see, he's thinking he can just price control everything out and just wave a magic wand and appear. Keep in mind, this is the guy, and this is an example of it, right? A great example of markets solving the problem versus the government from their perspective. See, the government or intellectual control. The city of New York's going to have the new city-run grocery store that's going to cost over $30 million to build. And it's not going to be built until 2029, 3 years from now. From the ground up. Now, they already have from the ground up, all these can make the same size store for about $1.5 million. Right there, the government's what? Wasting resources, consuming more resources for the same end. That's wastage. It's not reducing pollution, it's increasing waste, increasing pollution. And I said, that idiot thinks, I can just decree it. We mentioned before, Ehrlich and the population control people have been wrong in all the economics. Every one of them, they have been wrong on that. Current ecological and population problems have occurred when you have an overabundance of government. Now, as you can go through developing countries, the countries with the largest government have the most waste per person. That cause the most damage they have. Because why? The government wastes resource, consumes it, irrelevancy, without a concern of it, because it's trying to do is worth so much that anyone should sacrifice for it. Yes. In fact, there's a great Schadenfreude. In Europe, the European government believes its own propaganda, and they basically gave European government officials all electric cars. And then they had a conference in kind of like two capitals, Brussels and Strasbourg. So one of the things that a lot of them had to drive down to Strasbourg, but they all had electric cars, and they all ran out of juice trying to get to Strasbourg because they didn't realize the electric cars had limitations. And that was what? That was a failure. They suffered from the failure. Now they all want exemptions. Like most countries, give government officials, high government officials, exemptions to have gas banging engines because they work. In fact, those 7 listed reasons, I normally would flip back them, I can't, are actually made worse by state control and intervention, not better. All state powers feed the growth of government and the intellectuals who back it. In other words, it just makes them live better, and they get bigger egos in what they want to do. Okay, again, responding from those 7 points earlier, from a new class perspective. Resource limitation, not extreme, especially in a market problem, which systems will solve. If you have a market-based system, a market economy or free market economy, resource limitations are not going to be there. Because, well, the Earth is a limited globe. There's only so much on it. It's like, yes, but everything that's been on the Earth, all the atoms and stuff like that, are still there. In other words, all those atoms, they still exist. They're not running out because why? We still have them. A great example, which I didn't mention, but when Japan had this river where they were dumping waste, ridiculously much waste, they dumped so much waste that the town actually recouped the losses of the waste when a waste reclamation company paid the city for the rights to scoop up the waste because the company had dumped so much waste that the sump where the waste settled was actually worthwhile as chemical soup. That was a market solution. In other words, all that waste they dug up, they didn't dump it someplace else to rot. They did what? They reprocessed it. So it wasn't going to cause any more environmental damage. The private sector recycled efficiently. The governmental sector recycles wastefully. Growth, population, economic is saying, no, it's growth, population, and economic causing damage and endangering the environment. No. Where it is it has been the government controlling waste that causes damage, that causes constraints on the environment, far more so than particularly economic growth, even population growth. Fresh water, they say water, limited fresh water. Fresh water is far more limited by lack of property rights and poverty. In other words, the government trying to get more for itself is what has led to shortages of fresh water. In fact, go back in Los Angeles, they kept revoting until they had the 2 candidates they wanted to, the current mayor and now a Me Too mayor. That's just kind of funny. A guy came in second. He was 6 points ahead of the person who's now in second. We kept finding more ballots. Do you know they were going 100% for this person who'd been nearly 10 points behind? It's amazing. Because they want a debate between opposing views. And if you say, let's make sure everybody who's voting, these are real ballots, people say, oh, you're destroying democracy. You're endangering democracy. It's like, someone's stuffing extra ballots in here. But go back to fresh water. And why I use LA? There were reservoirs when they had those wildfires a year and a half ago caused by actually 2 groups, illegal immigrants and actually environmentalists. Both groups set the fires. The immigrant groups because they're just lighting and dropping things. The environmentalists because they wanted to get rid of all these homes being there because how can they build homes in nature? They should be destroyed. And it was the peasants were getting uppity trying to live better. So the nobility, in fact, the guy was coughing in. It's like, why am I being charged? I was just saving the planet. He was willing to risk the lives of people. Now we had in California for the previous several years copious amounts of rainfall. There were reservoirs that were left empty that they could have filled, and that reservoir wasn't perfect for it's being repurposed to be better for drinking water. It wasn't good for that. Yes, but you could fill it and use it for what? Water for fires. So fresh water is far more limited by the lack of property rights. In many countries, fresh water is controlled by the government. In fact, in Iran, which has never had difficulties with water for centuries, they have massive water limitations because the Iranian government gave most of the water rights to the Iranian power company and the Revolutionary Guard, which also connects to the government. They get all the water rights. You're an average person, you have to try to get stuff from them. In fact, if you try to create, if I'm a Armenian farmer, and I try to create what a lot of farmers have here, drainage ponds for the water to settle, and we have water and I cover it, right? Or I use that to fill in a cistern beneath the ground so it doesn't evaporate. That water belongs to the Iranian government, and they'll come and get me and punish me for stealing their water. Climate change. Its impact to the solutions to climate change would often cause more damage. The solutions people give for climate change would often cause more damage than other ways of doing things. There was the strict top-down control that people have. They must do it this way. They must live that way. Will cause more damage. Make sure just with windmills, the blades on windmills don't decay, and they wear out every few years, which means they are causing a massive encroachment in landfills. And they decay slowly. So we don't even know if these things are going to have, a lot of these things are fiberglass. Fiberglass breaks in little particulates, which can be bad for what? Lungs, soil, water, stuff like that. Soil and water, life, items there. They don't decay quickly. They were given an exemption because they're windmills, and windmills are holy. That's sustainability. That's perfectly fine. They actually exempted them. There was no environmental impact studies on windmills. That's not finding out what works. That's what? That's cooking the books. Political instability has been caused more by depopulation. Countries having declining populations automatically cause more political instability because, one, the economic point of view can't afford to pay for your current old. Almost every industrialized country has too many old people, and it's going to get worse, and you can't afford to pay for them. I'm not being cruel. And added, if you get people from other countries coming in, has said the crime rates in the European countries, stuff like that, have grown immensely huge. Because I know it's countries that haven't had an increase in crime rate have been like the Poles, Hungarians, all that, people who've really restricted immigration. They haven't seen that. And not just that, but you get social and economic disorder and the fights between them. I mean, heck, just the United States, when you had the fight over the, Somali learning centers in which people were basically running scams to get free money from the government. In other words, things that help people theoretically learn that don't really exist, but it gets lots of money. I'm not being cruel. People have done this. And a number of states, Virginia, and I think Minnesota's looking at this law, have laws saying you can't investigate, whether or not people are wasting money, because that might hurt people's feelings. Yes, I don't lie. Government controls establish more, do more damage. So it's like if you have the government running things, that's going to do more damage than anybody else because the government, remember, a politician shows his strength by his or her ability to waste resources and come up with the cool reasons why it's not wasting resources. Utility based, we discussed this before, we did the roles of government. Saving species is easy to say if you are not the one losing your job. Well, it should be compensated by the rest of the population. What if the rest of the population doesn't care about saving the species? Why should I pay for some guys losing his job? Now, if Hollywood's going to be stripped, like, for example, if Gwyneth Paltrow is going to suddenly find herself with no money, no inherited wealth, nothing, she's living on, $20 a day for the rest of her life, and everything's gone because it's saving the environment, she'd say, forget that. If it were actually going to happen. She'd probably say yes because she knows it's not going to happen. But, so it's easy to say do these things when you're not the one paying for it. In fact, what are you doing? I'm discounting the loss of others. Thank you. It's been great having you. I apologize for the few times I had to skip.